Okay, I guess we're all set for the recording, Well, welcome everybody on this lovely fall day. Glad you all could make it. And I guess you could tell from outside that it's something about the Fords with the two models out there. The Hal's 1937 Ford BB truck with the stake body, and then also Dick Krug's Model A, a 31 Model A. But the program is about the Wayside Inn Boys School, so I hope that you'll enjoy it all. And we just want to mention too, to plan ahead for the December meeting, which will be about the caroling program, and it will be here in front of Town Hall, but at 1 o'clock, which is a change of time for our meetings. And following about an hour or so of caroling, we'll have refreshments over at the Grange Hall. So I'll introduce Dick Krug now to lead the program for. Okay.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. What a perfect day. Henry Ford would have actually enjoyed this day. One of the things Henry Ford wanted to do is he wanted to make sure he made a car for everybody, not just for the rich, but for the multitudes. And one of his ideas was that his employees would buy one of his cars, and a day like today, on a Sunday afternoon when the sun was out, that was what it was all about. You'd take a ride in one of Henry Ford's Model Ts, Model As, whatever you decided to purchase. So before we begin, I'd like to just paint a little picture and plant a few seeds about Henry. Henry is a very interesting man. He's a very stubborn man. He has one idea in his mind. When he has an idea, you're going to do what Henry says. And he has no problem bullying people around. He has no problem hiring people that are bullies. And more interestingly, he has just one son, and his one son he decides to give a terrific education to, Edsel. And at the same time, Edsel becomes very polished, very refined, a gentleman, the exact opposite of his father. So there's this love-hate relationship. So I just wanted you to just understand a few things about Henry before we begin. So let's begin in the beginning. It's 1893. It is Dearborn, Michigan. It's a farm, and Henry's born on a farm to farming parents, Mary and John Ford. Henry is the eldest of 6 children. And it should be pointed out right from the get-go, Henry absolutely hates farming. His opinion is farming is way too much work, way too little in return. So Henry, being a very clever fellow, even though he only has a 6th grade education, Henry says to his parents, why don't you let my sisters and brothers do all the farming, and in return, I'll fix anything that's broken on the farm. I'll fix the plow, I'll fix the cultivator, I'll fix the wagons, I'll fix the harnesses, any farm implement, I'm going to fix them because I can do this. And the parents recognized this mechanical knowledge that he had at a very young age, and the parents go along with it. So his sisters and brothers do all the farming, and Henry's given use of the tool shed behind the house. And in this tool shed, Henry does what he does all his life, tinkering. He loves to tinker. He'll take small scraps of metal, he'll take pieces of wire. The next thing, he's got an electric motor, he's got a steam engine, and he's just done this out of his head. He also has an ability to do something that he and his lifelong friend can do, Thomas Edison. They can visualize. They can look at certain things without opening it, and they can actually understand all the working parts inside something. So that's another seed about Henry we should know right up front. Well, what happens down the road from this point here is he's working on the farm, he's just tinkering away with these little odds and ends that he has. And somebody gives him, at a very young age, he's probably a teenager at this point, somebody gives him a gentleman's watch. An old gentleman had a pocket watch at this time. Henry took the watch, which was broken, he opens it up, and he fixes it. He takes the watch completely apart, puts it back together again without any spare parts, which is kind of a trick. He puts it all back, and the watch works. This becomes Henry's pen money at the time. What it is he self-taught himself how to repair watches, and this gives him a couple bucks while he's working on the farm. Well, at some point in time, he's a teenager now at this point, and he decides he's going to leave Dearborn, and he heads for Detroit. And he's going to work for his lifelong friend, Thomas Edison. When he gets to Edison, who he works for 8 years, he is nothing but an apprentice. And again, I always point this out. Here we got a 6th grade education, and in 3 years with Edison, he becomes a chief engineer. So he's working with Edison, and at some point, again, same time frame, somewhere around 1885, 1886, he meets Clara Byron, and he marries Clara Byron in 1888 at the ripe age of 25 years old. Together, the two of them produce only one child, Edsel. Edsel's born in 1893. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. I just want to back up a little bit. While he's out in Detroit, it happens to be that Henry has another shed behind the house. He's renting this house in Detroit with his wife, and he has another shed, and once again, he's out there tinkering in the shed. So this, again, seems to be a habit of his, someplace where he can go and just do whatever he wants to do. When he's in Detroit, he doesn't entirely give up the farm. He decides that he'll go back to the farm periodically, and he's going to help his parents move produce to the market by horse and wagon, as opposed to not assisting at all. Because again, the sisters and brothers are doing all the farming. Henry's going to drive the horse and wagon to market. On one of these particular occasions, he's riding the market, and he sees something he has never seen before. He can't even believe this. It's his first time looking at this item. It's something he's read about, something he's heard about, and here is his first automobile. And you got to understand the time frame again. Automobiles in this time frame are nothing more than a horse-drawn wagon without the horses. They just have a motor on the wagon instead of the horses. But Henry jumps off his wagon, and he runs up to this car, and he only looks at one thing, the engine. And once again, he's doing that thing he does so well. He visualizes. He's standing there, and he's studying this engine without looking inside it, obviously. And he wants to know how that engine works and how it connects to those rear wheels to make it go. Well, sure than heck, he goes off the market after that. Once he's gone to the market, what Henry ends up doing is going back to his shop, into that shed, and he starts tinkering again. And he starts messing around with this car. It's 1894. It takes him 2 years. And in 2 years, he comes up with his quadricycle. Now, the quadricycle, as you can see it here, is it's a wagon, right? I mean, look at it. It's nothing more than a wagon. It's called a quadricycle because it's got the bicycle tires on it. It has a steering tiller like a boat would have. And it's a 2-cylinder engine. It has 2 speeds forward and nothing for reverse. It does not go backwards. It only goes forward. And actually, Henry has some moderate success with this. But once again, I want to backpedal here for a quick second. Just so you know where I'm coming from in this. I work for the town of Concord. I'm a 42-year employee of the town of Concord, but out of those 42 years, 32 years was spent on the police department. I'm retired law enforcement. I laugh at this because when this car gets on the road, there's no driver's license, there's no registration, there's no inspection sticker, there's no insurance, and what I love, there's no excise tax. Don't we love Massachusetts? Here we go. Well, he's out on the streets of Michigan, but before he can get out onto the streets, he's got to take it out of the shed behind his house. Because he built this in the shed down in Detroit. Well, the joke is, you don't see a garage door, do you? He made the mistake. The mechanical genius didn't know what a garage door was. He has to dismantle the shed so that he can get the car out onto the street. Well, as luck would have it, he has moderate success with the car. So much so that he decides he's going to build a race car. So he builds himself a race car. And this is another picture of the model, of the quadricycle. The body seems to have been changed a little bit. And if you look clearly at it, and that slide we just saw, you can see with the chain, it's got a bicycle chain on it. And that's how it connects to the wheels. The engine is nothing more than a bicycle chain. connection from the transmission to the rear drive wheels. Well, anyway, he builds this race car, and he's going to be the race driver. And again, he does this with moderate success, so much so that he moves forward and he hires himself a driver, and he builds another race car. Here we go. In this race car, Henry has hired this gentleman to drive for him. And what Henry's doing, very slowly and very quietly, he's making the name Henry Ford known around automobiles. And this may sound like nothing today, but you have to understand, in this era, we have about 50 startup companies every year and almost as many failures every year. There's probably a total of 250 auto manufacturers out there. Today, what do we have? Ford, Chrysler, GM. We have only 3, so you got to put it in perspective. There's probably 50 cars starting up every single year, and Henry decides he wants to get into the auto business. So he leaves Thomas Edison after 8 years, and he starts, with the helping of 2 auto backers, 2 financial backers, he starts what we call the Detroit Automobile Company. If you look really close between the 2 wheels on the right side, you can actually see Detroit Automobile Company. This is one of the few cars that they made before the company went belly up. Henry's problem, if you will, was he always wants to build a car that's affordable, reliable, dependable for the multitudes. He wants everybody to have a car. And the backers are of the opinion that cars are for the rich only, because that's all they had then. And Henry says, no, I want to build a car for everybody. So while he's building these cars, he would build perhaps this car here that was ordered by a customer, and the first thing Henry wants to do is take it on the road and road test it before it's sold. He would find something wrong with the car, he'd bring it back, he would completely dismantle the car, fix whatever he didn't like, reassemble it, and drive it for another test drive. Find out something else he didn't like about the car, and he would take it back to the plant again and start all over again. And what he's doing is making the perfect car at the expense of his backers, and he's not selling any cars. The company goes belly up. That's 1899. 2 years later, he finds another set of backers, and he starts another car company. This one, it's the Henry Ford Company. And when he starts the Henry Ford Company, it's actually just prior to this one. When he starts the Henry Ford Company, his backers once again want him to build an expensive car for the rich. Henry gets into a dispute with the bankers over this, and that company goes belly up. Just for a point of interest, this company becomes known as the Cadillac Motor Company. Okay, so he was going in the right direction, but still didn't get to where he wanted to go. So in 1901, he starts the Henry Ford Company that later becomes Cadillac. And then, once again, he gets a couple more backers, 1903, and this time he starts the Ford Motor Company. The company that you and I know today is the Ford Motor Company. With the Ford Motor Company, he starts off with his Model A and has some success with it. I want to clarify one thing. Out in the parking lot in front of the building is a Model A. That is my car. That is not the original Model A. The original was built in 1903, and here we go. Here's a picture of the Model A. And he has some success with it to a point that he builds a Model B. Perhaps a little classier, maybe bigger, maybe a little faster. And he goes from the B to the C. Now that's a Tin Lizzie, that's your Model T. But he goes from the A, B, C, he builds an F, a K, Model N, Model R, and Model S. He builds all those cars from 1903 to early 1908. In that 5-year span, he has built all the cars that he's thought he could get out of them, but he still made one mistake. He was still trying to get that reliable, affordable, dependable car. Well, in 1908, in late 1908, he finally hits pay dirt. He hits the car that he wanted all along. And of course, we're talking about the Model T. He makes his Model T. Now, the Model T is very simple. It does everything he wants it to do. It's very dependable. It's very reliable. However, it's expensive. It's about $800. It's about $750 to $800 a car. And as you can see, you can have any color you want as long as it's black. Anybody know why he wanted black cars? Other than he didn't have to accommodate anybody? There's a main reason. The main reason he wanted black cars was black paint dries quicker than any other color. And he's in this, let's get how many cars we can build a day. So the black helped him build as many cars as you want. So he's building his Model Ts, and still in 1908, he's got this thing, I got to make more cars, because if I can make more cars, I can sell more cars, and I can make them cheaper. How am I going to make more cars? He's traveling out in Chicago, and while he's in Chicago, he passes by a meat packing plant. And in this meat packing plant, that he gets the chance to look inside, across the ceiling are chains, and on the chains are hooks, and on the hooks are a side of beef. And this side of beef moves around the room, and it gets to the first butcher, and the first butcher cuts a side of beef off, a roast off, that he's going to make into steaks. And the side of beef keeps continuing. The second butcher gets a hold of it, and he cuts off some meat that he's going to cut into stew meat. And he gets to the third butcher, and the third butcher is going to cut off some meat that's probably going to be ground into hamburg. And Henry's sitting there, the guy who can envision these things, says, wow, can you imagine a transmission on that hook, and a front suspension on that hook, and perhaps a rear suspension, the engine on this hook, and I can have a conveyor belt in front of me, and I could have this car come down, the body could come down, the frame could come down the conveyor belt, the body could be dropped on the car, the wheels, he's got all this, his mind is just visualizing all these things. And it takes Henry 5 years, from 1908 to 1913, to come up with the assembly line. The assembly line builds the Model T in 82 very distinct steps. He can build a car from beginning to the very end in 93 minutes. However, he's got so many plants and so many assembly lines that, you ready? Henry is making 9,000 cars on a bad day. On a good day, he can make 10,000 cars, one every 8.5 seconds. This is how fast he's pumping the cars out. So the black car, all of this thing was very accommodating to him to make it that way. So Henry's making great cars, everything's good, but there was a problem with the assembly line. There's always a glitch. Do you ever notice that? Everything has something good about it, there's always something that's not so good. Well, what happens when he makes the assembly line is he gets all these disgruntled employees. Henry is employing, at his height, about 100,000 people. And the real problem is, when he's employing all these people, he had skilled labor. And the skilled labor says, you know what? I'm going to work for another company. I'm tired of sitting in front of this car every day, and you're putting the wheels on, and you're putting the front end in, and you're putting the steering wheel in, and you're putting the rear suspension. It was just unskilled labor. They wanted to go back where they could multitask and do multi-things with the car, because they knew the car from beginning to end. Once he started making the assembly line, he only knew one thing. Whatever your job was, that's all you did. So that became a real issue. So Henry says, at this point in time, we're paying you $2.38 for a 9-hour day. Henry says, I'm going to give you $5 a day. I am going to double your pay. I'm going to have you work 8 hours a day instead of 9 hours a day. And now all the people that were leaving all come back, and he gets more. So, like everything else, there's a catch. To make the $5 a day, you have to work or live at my standard of living. Henry is a teetotaler. He doesn't care for people who drink. He doesn't care for people who smoke. So you want to make $5 a day? You're not going to drink. You're not going to smoke. Your wife is going to be a homemaker. I don't know what that definition is, but I'm just going to say it loosely. You're going to be a homemaker. Your children will be cleaned and bathed and go to school every day. You will go to church on Sunday. We don't care what denomination, but you will go to church. He had all these stipulations. He wanted everybody to live like Henry did. And by the way, I own a bank. Henry owns a bank. I want you to bank money. In other words, I'm giving you twice the amount of money you had before. You're going to start saving some of your money. And by the way, another thing, you work for me, I want you to buy a Ford. Okay? I mean, he's got all these ideas in the back of his mind, and these are all the things he wants you to do. Well, anyway, he has success with this, and he even has a service department. The service department are his employees who come out and actually come to your house and inspect your house to make sure that you're doing what Henry wants you to be doing. Now, this becomes, when you work for Henry Ford, you have a badge to get into the factory. Well, Henry has a special badge if you're a $5 a day employee. So when you go into the company, everybody knows you're a $5 guy. You're one of these high standard living guys. It becomes such a badge of honor, this particular badge, that on Sunday, you would take it off your uniform and you would attach it to your top coat and you'd wear it to church that says, I work for Henry Ford and I make $5 a day. Okay? But these are, again, all Henry Ford's ideas. It solves a lot of the problems with the company. It really does. He's now, again, by the 1920s now, he's got the assembly line, he's got the $5 a day employees. Now he is buying up everything he can so that he can be completely and totally self-contained. Henry buys rubber plantations in Brazil. Henry buys and owns a fleet of ships. Henry has his own railroad. Henry has 16 coal mines so that he can make all the iron ore. Okay, he's got iron ore mines in Michigan and Minnesota, and he owns thousands of acres of timberland. Actually, Edsel does it. The son buys the land for him. And that's, if you look at my car when you're outside, you'll notice that the floorboard, there's a lot of wood. There's wood in the roof, there's wood on the floors, and a lot of the wood, just so you know, was actually the crates that the engine was shipped in. As soon as the crate was dismantled so that the engine can be dropped into the car, Henry took that wood and reused it. Nothing went to waste. Absolutely nothing. And this is a guy who's got more money probably than anybody in the world at this time. And let me backpedal one quick time again. When I said there were 50 startup companies and almost as many failures each year, if there's 250 cars on the road, 250 companies selling cars on the road, believe it or not, every second car is a Ford. So if you do that, theoretically, when Cadillac makes one car, and Chevy makes one car, and DeSoto makes one car, and everybody else makes just one car, all 250 of them, Henry has already made 250 cars. So it's 250 to 1 in theory. It's just unbelievable what he's done with the Model T. But he's now in tunnel vision. He's so impressed with his own car, and he's so wrapped up in the things that he's doing, he runs into the next issue. He doesn't get out of tunnel vision, and Edsel, his son, says to him, he says, Dad, GM is going to catch us. And the old man says, they'll never touch us. Can't happen. He says, I got the reliable, dependable, affordable. Oh, and by the way, I didn't say that. Affordable. When he was making the $9,000 and $10,000 cars, 9,000 cars and 10,000 cars a day, he now has dropped the price from $750 to about $285. Okay, and again, so the cars are really moving quite rapidly. Well, this is going so well, but Edsel keeps saying it, and anybody else told him in the company. If anybody else in that company said the same thing to him, he got rid of them. If anybody says, oh, you know what, GM's going to, he'd fire him. He'd find a way to get rid of them. He had no problem getting rid of people. He was always suspicious of people with an education. He didn't trust people who had college degrees. This is another one of his major mistakes. And of course, these are the people that can see that, Chevy's offering options, Chevy's offering colors, and Henry he would move on it. And in early 1927, Henry finally sees the message. He sees the writing on the wall. Guess what? Chevy's going to catch him. So he gets really, really upset in 1927. So what he ends up doing is he ends up shutting the line down, the Model Ts, after 19 years and 15 million Model Ts. He shuts the assembly plant down. He retools the plant for 6 months, and he comes out with, quote unquote, the new Ford. The new Ford is really the Model A, what I have out in the parking lot. This is his second time through the alphabet. and he sells 5 million Model Ts. What you're looking at here is a 29. I can just tell by looking at the grill. The nickel around the radiator, that's a 20. This is a 29 also, with the tiny hubcaps. 31. A little change, though. Somebody's messed around with it. But anyway, he has success. Edsel's gift, if you will, we all have gifts. Edsel's gift happens to be that he's a car designer. Edsel completely designs the Model A. All that came from him. And again, the car is incredible success. He makes it for 4 years, 5 million cars until 1932. And in 1932, he comes out with the Model B. The Model B is mass-produced V8. So Henry's not the first person to make a V8, but he's the first person to mass-produce the V8 engine. Here it is here, and it's a small, very compact engine, and it's a whopping 60 horsepower. The Model T was 20 horsepower. The Model A was 40. What I have out here, it's a 40 horsepower. And when he came out with the V8, went up to 60 horsepower. So it was triple the power of the other, which sounds like nothing today, but it's actually pretty impressive. At this point in time, Henry's doing really well. You know, the company's doing well. The cars are doing well. And unfortunately, in 1943, just before he turns 49 years old, this love-hate relationship Henry had with his son Edsel took its toll on poor Edsel. And Edsel, who was, by the way, a very, very heavy smoker, dies. Now, we don't know if it's the smoking or it's the turmoil between himself and his father. He absolutely adores his father. He'll do anything the father asks him, but the father doesn't want this. But what his father wants is he wants him to be tough. He wants, just like Henry is. Henry's idea is give him an instruction. If they don't follow the instruction, punch them. This is literally, he's a bully. He said, just knock them down. This is what he tells his foreman. Just knock them down. The next time you give them instruction, they'll do what they're told. And if they don't do it, you knock them down again. And if they don't listen the second time, get rid of them. We don't need them. That's his feeling. With Edsel is, let's talk about it. Let's discuss it. Let's finish with us both being winners. A win-win situation. Henry's was no. I win, you lose. It's as simple as that. And that was that relationship, even though, as I said, Edsel always absolutely adored his father. Well, when Edsel dies in 1943, Henry is 80 years old. Edsel was the president of the company, and now Henry places himself back into the company as the chief CEO of the company, of the Ford Motor Company. But Henry at this point is suffering from dementia, and he's hired a thug by the name of Bennett. I'm not going to get into Bennett, but Bennett is nothing more than a gangster who brings in a bunch of other gangsters, and they're running the company now with all these thugs. And Henry doesn't pick up on this, but Edsel knew it, but Edsel now has passed away. So what Henry does is, I'm going to take over the company again. Well, Edsel's wife, Eleanor, Henry's wife, Clara, get together, and they say, I think Henry II should be the next CEO. And Henry II, just so you know who he is Edsel produced 4 children. Henry II, Benson, Josephine, and Henry Clay Ford. Those are his 4 children. They want the oldest grandson of Henry, who's 25 years old, to run the company. Henry says, no way. And the women say, Henry, I don't think you understand. You know, you got to watch when 2 women get together. Anyway, here they go. The 2 women say, Henry, I don't think you understand. And Henry says, of course I do. I'm the boss. I run the show. I made the company. I say what goes. And the 2 women say, well, let's put it another way. When Edsel died, he had stock in the company. Eleanor now has that stock. Eleanor has her own stock. Clara, me, I have my stock. Between those 3 piles of stock, we have more stock than you do. Henry, I think, saw the light bulb. Okay, you know what I'm saying? Well, sure as it goes, Henry II becomes, which is Henry's grandson, runs the company. The first thing he does, he runs in and he gets rid of Bennett, the gangster. Get rid of him. Get rid of all the boys. The second thing he did was he did the exact opposite of Henry. He went after what he called the whiz kids. The whiz kids are Very good. Who said it? Very good. McNamara. He went after all the people who had educations, who were polished, and it put Ford Motor Company back on stable ground. Because let me tell you, when Edsel dies, the company's in rough shape. It's in rough shape because of this guy Bennett. But anyway, now Henry's 80 years old. In 3 more years, in 1947, about 21 days before I am born, in April of 47, Henry dies. He dies out in Detroit, Michigan, very quietly, and that pretty much is all of Henry. Again, I glossed over a lot of things because I know what you really came here today for was the Wayside Inn and the trade school. Lee, are you ready at this point? Or I didn't go too quick for you. Lee said I can only talk for 30 minutes. I can talk for an hour and a half, easily.
Thank you, Dick.
Thank you.
We're now going to see, since Moose Longy is not able to be here because of illness, he has recently come out of the rehabilitation because of a problem. He's not able to be here. My question, though, is are there any graduates here today, right now? Are there any relatives of graduates of the boys' school? Way back there. You're obviously not a graduate, but what was his last name? Michael Farr, yes. Okay, I've luckily put them in the program without knowing you're going to be here. Anyone else? Okay, so we're now going to watch an interview with the 4 of the boys that will give you
1937 to June 41.
I'm Carl Hayes. I'm 1930 to 1935. I'm the old timer.
I am Bill Quinn. I came in June of 1932, graduated in 1937.
I'm Joseph McDonald, 1936, and I graduated in 1940.
Great. Now, you all are graduates of the Wayside Inn Boys School. What I'd like to find out a little bit is what you did here at the school. From my understanding, it was sort of a trade school, so you all had classes about half the day, and then you were involved with trades.
This is on the left.
And you worked around in the inn and the rest of the day. I might be wrong. That's my basic understanding of it. But if you could tell me just a little bit about what you did here, that would be real helpful.
When I came to the school, it was 30 days in school and 30 days out working the property. We had the same studies as in high school, but we also studied the farming aspect of it.
When I first came in 1930, it was a trade school, and we worked a half a day at a trade, and then the other half day had the classroom work, and then we would swap mid-year and go to the classroom in the afternoon and work in the morning. And then later on it changed to an agricultural school, and I was one of the boys that worked on the chapel down here to help build a chapel from the 38 Hurricane lumber.
Also, June of 1932, when I came to the school, that was the month that the school was changed from a trade school to an agricultural school. And as Carl has specified, we went to school half a day and worked half a day in reverse for each semester. I am also one of the other individuals that worked on the chapel. I worked on the predella, which you call the altar. I did the paneling twice. I'll tell you about that later. And I also helped build the steeple on the ground, Phil Noyes and myself and Carl, and then we hoisted it on a gin pole and put it up in place. I've said too much already, Joe.
I think it might be interesting to know that I think one of the reasons that Mr. Ford changed the school from a trade school to agriculture was because he felt that with the assembly lines, that man would produce enough in 9 months in the assembly and in the plants to supply the public with the product that they wanted. And he felt that then the man or the person working in the shop would work on a farm or in a garden the other 3 months of the year and produce food for the family and so forth. And I also worked on the chapel just prior to entering the Army in 1940, the stone wall that runs around the front. I helped put there by getting the stones out of it all over the woods and dumping them there, and then the masons made the stone walls. Thank you.
If I may add, the boys are correct. We worked a month in the field, so to speak, and a month in school. But also, I was involved in the chapel. Being big, I was the guy that had to pick up the stones and get them to Joe to put on the wall. But we all helped from the hurricane of '38, which we lost power here, I believe, for 10 days at the time, and we had to cut and chop our way through the Inn Road here, as I remember.
The hill, incidentally, where the chapel is, that was covered completely with pine, and after the hurricane, it was completely down. And I believe Mr. Ford came on, and when he saw it, he decided they'd clear the land and then build the chapel. And I believe the name Martha Mary came from his wife's...
His mother and
his mother and his wife's mother.
His wife's mother. That's the reason for that. That's why the chapel came here later on.
And also interesting, people don't realize that we cut our own lumber. All that lumber for the chapel, except for the finish work, was cut in our own lumber yard down in Dutton Road. And we also had a hand in operating that. And so...
Well, there were so many logs that they had to build a boom in the pond at the country store. And every once in a while, here's what, 50 years gone by, a log comes up. Even now, a log comes up on the place, which is hard to believe.
I thought it might be interesting to say that you would be, as boys, we would be assigned a 2-week program. Say for 2 weeks I'd go to school in the morning, 8 to 12, back to lunch, and then from say 1 to 5, my tour of duty would be, say, over here at the grist mill, helping the miller clean it, fill in the bags with the meal. Now, 2 weeks later, we'd have another change, and I might be assigned to the poultry plant where the chickens work, taking care of that. 2 weeks later, I might get kitchen work for 2 weeks. That's how it went. So for that 1 year, you'd be going to school in the morning, and then the next year, we'd probably go to school in the afternoon. Now, I always found it difficult. If you worked out, say, outdoors in the winter, and you went in and had lunch, then you went to a classroom in one of the old buildings that they had here, where the heat ran along the side between the dinner you ate, the cold that you'd been out in all morning.
Try to stay awake.
You fell asleep in the afternoon. So there was kind of difficult to study.
What other thing that most people have forgotten, when the school first started, we used to have to eat at the Wayside Inn. They would bring the meals up for breakfast up here at the Calvin Howell, but then wherever we worked, we'd have to come, change shirt and tie and jacket, and go to the inn for dinner, come back, change into work clothes, go to work, go to school, then turn around at night, go back down, all dressed up again to eat our meals at the inn. And Sunday was the only day that we didn't eat at the inn. They used to bring the meals up and we'd have them at the school. But we had to, and we'd sit in a big dining room, all the tables, and we'd have a host or a hostess sit with us and tell us which fork to use and which spoon, which knife, and then sometimes we'd have outside guests that would come and sit at the tables with us. So it was quite an education that way, believe me.
Because the age ran from 12 to 16 years of age, or 17, let's put it 12, 13, 17, 18 at the most. So when you're sitting in there and they told you this is the salad fork, and this is the dessert spoon, this is the soup spoon, and this is the napkin ring, and the napkin ring had our name on it, so we had to use the napkins. And
that's right, too. We had a napkin ring with our name, and it would be in the back of the thing. We'd walk in and pick up on it.
But this was complete new training to us for the simple reason every one of us, either orphans or disadvantaged youth. That's the kind of thing I can say, particularly about myself, because I was on the borderline of flipping over. I was fighting society, and I was brought here, and like a little puppy, I wanted the place where I came from, and it was the pits. I'm sorry to say, as in Rhode Island, and I was working right behind you in the field picking potato bugs, putting them in a can. I looked up, saw the road. I said, they can't keep me here, so I got up and I walked out onto the road. Nobody said a word to me. I walked down as far as the beginning of the Wayside Inn Road and got there, and I got the smarts. Believe it or not, it came to me all of a sudden. I turned around, come back, picked up my potato bug can, and continued picking potato bugs. And it was the best move I ever made in my life.
I'll have to go along with Bill on that. I come from Springfield, Mass, and I definitely came from the other side of the tracks. And if I had stayed there, I'm sure I would have had problems. But coming here, and at that time, Mr. William F. Young was the headmaster, and I give him a lot of credit for turning me personally around, but I'm sure he had an effect on all of us, and he was just a super guy to be with.
We were very fortunate to come here, very, because who knows what our life would have been. You know, we're more or less foster children, state children.
Being a state ward, when a boy got to be 12 or 13 years old at that time, the state didn't finance you, didn't pay whoever you were staying with, and they had to either absorb what it cost them for you to be there or put you out to work somewhere. And so the alternative for a lot of us was to come here, and we were handpicked, and in the beginning it was just Massachusetts that came here for several years. It was just boys from Massachusetts, and then eventually when they built the other Dutton House, they brought in boys from Rhode Island, all over New England. I don't think anyone came from anywhere other than New England. And then there were a few that had one parent that lived here in Sudbury or in Marlborough that weren't wards that came here, but 99% were all sort of. Then they had us all, in the beginning, you'd go to school and they'd go out to Detroit, the big trade school out in Detroit. Well, then when he changed the place around to an agricultural school, that all stopped, and for quite a few years everybody that graduated got a position on the estate, and you worked well, maybe at the inn, or in my case I worked down in the woodworking department, the salvage yard, and then I went on to be a woodworker and a carpenter and this sort of thing, and so that was a change for me.
Well, another thing that I think we didn't mention yet was that we got paid to go to school. And not much. I think it was 19 cents an hour, 20 cents an hour, 21 and 22 was tops.
Well, I remember getting $7.31 a month. That's what my pay was.
But out of that, you had to make a budget, which was approved by the headmaster at the time, and you had to buy your own clothes, whatever you needed, all wanted, came out of that money. And some of us saved money, and some of us raised gardens and made money on the side. But
they checked that budget pretty strict too, because you'd put down, well, I'm going to buy a shirt. Well, you'd buy the shirt this week, and then next time that the budget come out, you put a shirt again, you know, and by and by Bill Young would come along and say, hey, you've got 4 shirts, where are they? You know, we had the money somewhere else.
See, I think the reason for the salary was because they wanted to teach you how to handle money. So then the reason for the budget was you'd present the budget every month when you get paid.
Yeah.
And of course, in the school menu, we weren't allowed salt, pepper, candy, or any of these things.
Pies were out.
And the school menu also consisted of all your starch material foods would be at the noon lunch program. We'll say, for example, the bread was whole wheat bread, ground here at the grist mill, made at the Wayside Inn. It was 3 days old before we got it. This was healthy for me. And at night, the supper would consist of nothing but meats, vegetables, no starches. Try going at night without eating any starch and see how hungry you are. You quickly get hungry.
Well, they're talking
so
about
I think that's the reason for the salary and the pay, yeah.
Another thing that we've kind of gone by and overlooked on this candy business, we weren't allowed to have any candy. And we used to go to a place up the road here that's Pelican Bay now. It was a log cabin at that time. Matter of fact, it was my wife's family that owned the thing, and we'd go up there and they'd buy a box of Milky Ways or a box of Snickers, and they were like a nickel a piece in those days, and we'd bring them back and sell them double the money. Well, we'd hide them, of course, and thinking back on it, those instructors, they must have known that we were doing something like this, but they didn't say. But there were some boys that got expelled because they bought the candy and was selling the candy or cigarettes, and they got expelled and went back to the state, and Lord knows where they ended up. So they had a thumb on you, too.
They had a thumb on us in everything. In other words, we thought we were doing things like getting up in the middle of the night and go running around through the woods or taking the trucks and driving. I remember one time, about 2 o'clock in the morning, I shinnied down the drain pipe at the Dutton house out of my room, got down at the bottom, and I heard a voice behind me say, "Well, Mr. Quinn," and look behind, there's Mr. Young. "Where you going?" "Nowhere, sir." He says, "Well, get back to your room." "Yes, sir," and I started walking. "Same way you came down." I had to go back up the same way. So that was a type of discipline we had, excellent discipline. And it was, there was enough tender loving care in there so that we didn't become, I don't know how you say, a person that felt that we were the only one in the school, because we were one of many. But you felt that if anything went wrong, you had somebody to go to, and you had that little caring by individuals that would listen to your problems and help you out.
Well, to help you on your insight, it might be fun to talk to Mrs. Young. Of course, Mr. Young passed on 3 or 4 years ago, but Mrs. Young, she's coming up the night of the affair, but I'm sure she could give you a lot. But like some of the fellows said, the things we did, like behind you, there's a big underground cavern there. It used to be the cider mill, and we used to store all the apples, and we used to open up and go down and get the cider and come back up, and we'd put it in the fireplaces up at Calvin Howe. And when I think it was Mr. Valdina moved in, he was wondering why the fireplace didn't work. He found out. He put his hand up there, and there was everything: candy, cheese, preserves, and of course apples that we took from the mountain. So we had a lot of fun, and it was a great life. We had the world by the tail, and we didn't realize it. But as an added note, it took 4 years of agriculture and ended up 32 years in a machine job.
I have a little story. Bill will verify this. When I was in the school, I took to carpentry, and why or what, I built a cedar chest, big pine cedar chest, and I lined it all with cedar. And I had just finished it, and I don't recall a reason of why I built it, but Mrs. Ford happened to be around, and she wanted a chest to take back to Dearborn, store blankets in. So they put this chest on the station wagon or to pick up and get down and showed it to her. I wanted the big sum of $50 for it. Too much money, I won't pay it. I've got the cedar chest in my house today. She never did get it. I wouldn't come down on the price. She never did get it. So.
It was a wonderful thing, because Carl did, so did I. I learned my trade, cabinet making, carpentry, at the salvage yard under the direction of Danny Blue. And up through my junior year, I couldn't even plane a board straight. Believe it or not, I couldn't do it. And Danny Blue was practically beside himself, because he sort of took a liking to Carl and myself and a few others. He thought we had potential. Well, he saw something I didn't, because my senior year, I had passed everybody in my class and was doing a fine example of carpentry work and cabinet making, and finally got hired when I graduated, and stayed there for a few years, such as the same as Carl did. And the last big project we had was the chapel. You remember the last day in the chapel, Carl, that I wanted to drive the D6?
Yeah.
And one of the Finnish gentlemen let me get in as a bulldozer, let me drive it, and I took the corner of the chapel off with his blade.
I used to work at the inn itself as a host for a couple of years. I worked 2 years, I think. In the afternoons, I used to have to walk over to the Mary Lamb schoolhouse and open it up. There's a bus tour comes out of Boston. I think used to, and I think it still does, called the Gray Line. They start out in Boston and they go to Harvard Square and around. They go up to Concord and Lexington. Then they managed to get out here on time to visit the grist mill and the country store. Then they'd have dinner at the Wayside Inn, a lunch, and then they'd come over to the Maryland School. And I used to tell them the story about how Mr. Ford purchased the building and the story of marrying her to the land. But I bring this thing up about being the host because when Mr. Ford, or as they used to familiarly call him, the old man came east, he would always stay at the inn. And now today, if a person like Mr. Ford came on, I'm sure we'd have to have a lot of security in today's society. But Mr. Ford could come on, and he would sleep in a room called the Ford Room, him and his wife. No extra precautions, nothing but the regular night watchman. Very easy to work with. He'd come out, he'd walk around the properties and stay 3 or 4 days and enjoy himself here. But you couldn't do that today with this
You all
place.
had an opportunity to meet Henry Ford.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
What was your impression of Ford?
He tried to teach me how to play the juice harp. He was fantastic at that thing, that juice harp, you know, it's just a little thing with a wire on it. Go, blah, 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 blah. I never could master it, but he had several other kids that could do that. And he'd be around early in the morning, walking around. He'd be up early, and he'd come around, he'd talk, and he'd take somebody off. And we used to be nervous about who he'd take with him. He'd be trying to find out information about what's going on and what they're doing and what they're not doing. And then he'd say, well, you can have this, you can have that. And then one of his men behind him would say, well, forget that. This type of a thing went on, too, with him. See?
Well, he used to get up at 5 in the morning. He would be wandering out through the woods. Nobody around him, except Mr. Sennett, who was the manager at the time. He was frustrated because he couldn't keep up with him or didn't know where he was.
He wasn't a big man. He was
a
most
small
everybody
guy.
figures he was a tall person, but he wasn't. He was a very short man.
He came to the dance one night where we did the old-fashioned dancing, and he walked right in and said, "Stop." And Pop Haynes had to stop the dance. He says, "I'll show you how I want it done." And he took one of the young ladies and he did the dance. And he said, "That's how I want it done." And that was the end. But again, all of us were very, very lucky to have gone here. And I thank Mr. Ford and all his family for it. But it was really a joy to be here for 4 years and meet the friends I've made with these fellas, and all the other boys were in contact, still in contact. I think, Bill, what is there, about 50 of us, 60 of us?
Still that we have direct contact at the moment. There are many more out there, and we're picking them up, believe it or not, even 40, 50 years later, we're picking them up. And it's wonderful to hear from some of them. Some of them, no doubt, have passed on. Some of the old timers in your era.
Don't look at me.
In your era, pal. I mean, us young fellows, we...
Then in by the way, that was Laura Scott Lowell who made that, who was our town historian back in '89. But in 1932, someone, which we still do not know who, made a 16mm film that when I became curator at the inn many years ago, I found 6 reels of this film and sent it to the New England Film Archives in Maine, and they restored it and gave us a copy, and here are some excerpts. The boys were taken, all of them, to various locations during the summer. This is Duxbury Beach. So it wasn't all work. As Carl Hayes was speaking about it, if they needed equipment, they would ask Mr. Ford, and he would say yes, but the so-called flunky behind him would say, "Forget it, you'll never get it." Cancel the order. Halloween party. This was in one of the, let's see, this is in the main dining room, I'm sorry, the main ballroom, which no longer exists, was over the main dining room at the inn until the fire in '55, and it was not replaced. So they came here the boys came here, they were ushered and with the girls that were brought in from Marlborough and Hudson and other towns. Mr. Hanna was a teacher, instructor. He usually didn't wear that at work. And his wife usually didn't look like a witch. So here you had a joining of the boys' school with the girls brought in, along with the instructors, and also townspeople would be invited to these parties at the inn. You can actually go to the New England Film Archives website and see some of these pieces. It's called the Wayside Inn Collection. This pond is the gristmill pond, and you see a lack of equipment. It's another factor that they asked, but they didn't get it.
What was the building in the background?
That was the Calvin Howe House, which you're now looking at. Calvin Howe House was a mansion, the Bright Mansion. Before that, Calvin Howe built it. Built about 1840. This is the garden at the Calvin Howe House. They had lots of snow to shovel. As you'll see, it was done by hand and also by oxen pulling a plow, and occasionally they would get one of the tractors involved. This is the inn after a small snowstorm.
Where's the Calvin Howe house?
Calvin Howe House is opposite the Howe Dam at the gristmill pond. There's just a foundation left if you really look carefully. So on the grounds we had the Wayside Inn Boys School, starting in '28, the Redstone Schoolhouse children, and the Southwest School. So here was Mr. Campbell leading his team of oxen. Anytime something had to be done on the estate, it had to be done by oxen. Here they are pulling a plow, if possible, with the orders by Henry. He wanted that look. Because at that time, in 1932, there was almost 5,000 acres, later reduced to something more manageable of 2,995 acres. And you recognize the gristmill. And the trees are really bent over at the inn. Adam Howe House is the house as you enter Wayside Inn Road, right on the right, with the pillars in front. And the Southwest School, another public school, 5 through 8, now owned by Blanchard, the first house on Pekin Road from Route 20. They had a Christmas festival at the general store, which when my parents bought it, we called it the Wayside Country Store. And you'll see other pictures of the tabloid manger, singing, bitter cold audience of over a thousand people would be watching this. What I never could find out is after this large audience sitting or standing there watching this and listening to it, the singing and all, if they were served hot cider, but I've never known how they got warmed up. So these are all boys from the boys' school. And this is in the main dining room at the inn. You see it had exposed posts and beams before the fire, which really made it look quite different than it does today. That is, they're holding up the pilot, which is the publication which I have on the tables there. They produced. And old Saint Nick, who is very, with a close-up you'll see, is a mean-looking guy. He's smiling, I guess. There are one chance of eating candy at a Christmas party. At this point in 1932, there were basically 400 employees of the Wayside Inn on the 2,000, 5,000 acres or whatever. That also was counting the boys at the boys' school, because as you heard, they were paid. This is at the Laughlin, which I now believe is owned by Mayo, on Wayside and Road. A Fordson tractor with a killer steel wheel. When you hit a bump in one of those, your vehicle might tip right over. Pardon? Wayside and Road is Wayside and Road. No, I'm talking about Wayside and Road in Sudbury. I can't tell what they're planting here. It's a round bulb with something that's already growing. It might be onions. This is a herd of cattle at what is now Tony Howe's place, the Ezekiel Howe house on Wayside and Road in Framingham. Lots of sheep, for some strange reason, all roaming about, and everything was fenced in. They could roam all around the barn and the grist mill. Out of a class of 12 boys, perhaps only 6 made it to the end to graduate after 4 years. But they would graduate from freshman to sophomore. There was a ceremony, as you see. These are seniors graduating 1932. Through the years, I've met many of these boys, as we call them. They'll always be boys. And you could always tell that they had even though I didn't know them, that they were a graduate. There was something special about them. So they would plant a tree, this time in front of the inn at the senior graduation. And careful tabulation was kept of all the trees being planted, and there was a great blueprint of all the trees on the estate. Yeah, come on. Here is the old man standing by the pump. There was 4 pumps in the greater Wayside Inn area. This is at the Southwest School, which is still there and maintained by Mr. Blanchard. But here was his idea to create a school, which he had already done in Detroit, but this is going to be a little bit different, and starting in 1928. And this is a copy of the pilot with Camino's background in it. I'll just read it. The beaming countenance which you gaze upon belongs to a gentleman with the collective title of Camino Arthur David Longy, alias Moose, Docky, Muscle, etc. The first probably relating to the bulk of a neatly 200-pound, also a very possible relation to one of the dictators. Very often he may be heard vociferously denouncing the victorious Greeks. He hails from Springfield, Mass., and spent the majority of his 19 years in Franklin, Mass. One of Camino's most valuable assets is his natural ability to make friends. If he should die from poverty, which he probably will not, it will be only because he gave away the shirt from his own back. He truly earned the title of best athlete by being on the varsity baseball team all of his 4 years at Wayside. In his junior year, he made the track team and he played hockey. In his senior year, he participated in those sports also. As for his social life, well, he just doesn't attend all the Sunday afternoon hockey games by accident, and nothing short of 2 broken legs could keep him away from the dancing class. Besides being a member of the 4-H club, he was the club treasurer. He joined the swine and dairy club, raising a pig and 2 calves. But these were 12 to 13-year-old boys coming to the school from very usually poor circumstances, and they were interviewed by the social worker, who was called the visitor, in their various abodes where they were living, and what they didn't know is that Henry was doing a dossier on each one of them before entering the school to try to see who could succeed. And those records are sealed at the Wayside Inn archives because they're very personal. But when he came here, he was running alone and not part of a team. Once he got here to the Wayside Inn Boys School, he was part of a team. And this is Moose. And the young lady that said she was related to Farr, I believe Farr is in this picture, but I'm not sure. I do have other pictures with Mr. Farr. But this is where suddenly, from poor circumstances, he was living in a mansion. The Calvin Howe house, the Bright mansion, and whatever you want to call it, but now it was the Calvin Howe house dormitory. And this is taken from someone in a boat out in the gristmill pond looking across the road. This is Wayside Road right here. It was a very small turnaround in front to come up to the front of the house. And this is it in winter. And here was a warm environment with friends and heat. And they got, as you heard, they got paid. And that was what is called a scholarship. The scholarship, they got paid for in a unique way for their work and for their education. And this is 38 when they had a brand new bus after they wore out one bus, and this is a map so you can figure out where the heck I'm talking about. Here is the inn. Here is Wayside Inn Road. Well, that's the road directly in front of the inn. Here is what is Wayside Inn Road today, and this is the new Boston Post Road, which Henry, as you probably all know, cost him $280,000 to build it, 1 mile in length, and he gave it to the state for $1. But it took away the traffic away from directly in front of the inn. But so there's the inn. Here is the Calvin Howe House. And you see what is missing because the map was done in 1937. There is no chapel. But here is the grist mill and the cooling plant, which is almost 1/4 of an acre underground structure beside the grist mill, which you can see through an iron gate. But they had a baseball field, they had a recreation field, and this map does not show a later piece which was called the airplane hangar and field, airfield. But here is there is no barn. They tore the barn. That's Ursula Lyons asking where the barn is. She was shown a picture of a barn, and she has it with her, but it is not here because at this point there was no barn here. It had been torn down. It belonged to the Calvin Howe House. It was a small barn, and it was torn down. This is, if you want to know where Ursula Lyons lives, she lives right there. But moving on, this is what Moose suddenly discovered was his home base, the world's most famous inn. And as he saw it before the fire with the dormer windows and the south porch, which would be covered in the summer, outside sort of dining. And there's the old man again wondering if this is all going to be worthwhile. But he hired the best. This is Mr. William F. Young, who was a headmaster for many years, and as you heard the boys speak of him, he was a real gentleman and treated everyone fairly. Many of these instructors did not last long because it was rigorous on both sides, as an instructor and also as a student. And this is the mystery dormitory known as Dutton Lodge or the Dutton House. And this house still exists, and except it's been moved across the street. It's on Dutton Road, and this house has been cut in half. This house has been is still there, but has pillars out front. And then there was a barn, as you'll see. This is a rare picture of the Dutton House with the back. You see part of the back, and this is with a main dormitory. At first, they slept in the Calvin Howe House. Then, once this was built in the 30s, this became the main dormitory for the boys. Huge barn behind. This is the greenhouse that this house was within the last 8 years has been torn down along Dutton Road, and but that people would always call up and ask, why does this have a 20-foot basement in height? And it's because this is where the furnaces were for the greenhouses and for heating the dormitory. So out of a developer back in the 1950s took this fantastically large building and did something that no one thought he could do. He created, as I say, 4 houses out of this, and perhaps some of the owners are here today. But along with the inn, Moose was suddenly had responsibility some days of being the host at the Little Red Schoolhouse, and you never knew who you were going to meet. But in the summer, they would go to Mount Washington or other mountains for vacations, and they showed their relationship to Wayside by spelling out W. And perhaps this was their idea, but most of the boys were thankful for this experience. Some left in the middle of the night, and we have records here of the boys drawn from the Wayside Inn archives, but there are still people that attended school but didn't stay long enough to be recorded, I'm afraid. This is on the back. It said carpenter, and there are no carpenter boys that went to school, but this explains why there was a house at the corner of Dutton Road and the railroad track, and that's where the carpenters lived. And that's what I heard years ago, that local boys would, because there were all these other boys there, that they'd come up and chum with them. And here is one class in the time of Moose that was at the school and standing in front of the Calvin Howe house. And then, because in '29 they had built the grist mill, and this is another job for the boys to come here and pack the flour and assist the miller. So they had a great variety, and here they could learn mercantile training by working in the country store that Henry Ford had moved from Sudbury Center in 1930 and opened it, and then later owned by my parents. But strike. They played baseball, they had stockings, they had uniform bottoms and tops. He's not wearing any regulation top, but there is the Wayside baseball team top, and that's what he was wearing. He was wearing a dark top. And guess where, after the school closed in 1947, guess where they were given to? They were given to the Sudbury High School. And someday I hope to find one, because the Sudbury High School didn't have any uniforms. And this is a 1935 incoming class, but they're standing. This is the elegant. This is why it was called a mansion. This is the entrance to the Calvin Howe house, and here these kids coming from very poor circumstances are suddenly living in a mansion. This is the main dining room at the inn, as I spoke of earlier. It has post and beam construction, and going there as a child, it was very different atmosphere than what it is today. It was really unique. And you see these little narrow boards. They were 18 to 24 inches in width. Real narrow, yeah. Mm-hmm. But this is the large ballroom, which walking across it as a kid, and it was empty. It was set on, I was told it was set on automobile springs, so walking across it, I could bounce, boom, 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 because it was such a beautiful floor and set on automobile springs. And of course, after the fire, it showed, there was pictures of showing the automobile springs sticking out of the ashes after '55. But a massive room. This is where the guest rooms are now, 1 through 8. This is Moose Longy. He's learning how to make concrete, which you'll see that he uses expertise in a way he couldn't foretell. But this is his first love. Have you ever loved a calf? Well, he got the idea of getting a calf, and he bought it with his savings, and he raised it behind the Solomon Dutton Lodge, or Dutton House, and then also kept it at the Ezekiel Howe House on Wayside and Road in Framingham. And he sold it, he raised it, sold it, and made money, and then got another calf, plus the pig. This is an incoming class, all with their Sheen Clothing Company clothing that they were all got their clothing from Marlboro, and listening to the radio, and in some cases building a radio from scratch. I hadn't noticed it, but this is a kid lying down here. And Moose is right here. This is his. This is the pilot group that published the pilot, which are some samples are shown on the table over in front here. So he had many challenges in his life at the school. Wasn't just work. And here is Henry in a very rare picture, standing in front of a pile of soybeans. The first crop of soybeans raised for his pilot project to create an artificial metal, as he called it at one point, or plastic, as we would know it to be, was grown here in Sudbury on Dutton Road at what is now the Memorial Forest, run by the ladies, what is it? The Combined Ladies Federation, thank you. But the first crop was there, and there's a picture of Henry standing in front of it. This is the Judge Cash, a student, a friend of his name is, there's 3 Cash brothers that attended the school. There's John, Fred, and William. And this is William Cash, his proper name. But digging out, and this is one of the students skiing at the ski jump. And here we have pictures of how far they went with this manger scene. Here's the inn at the setup at the Wayside Country Store, or general store at that point, for the Christmas festivities. And they really did all this work themselves, the boys did, to create this, and then put it on for the public. And quite a challenge, because they had to light it also, and you see all the grasses there. They didn't start a fire. And here they are with the choir and standing in front of the general store. And these are 3 of the 6 graduates, and you said your name was Farr, so this is Stanley Farr on the left here, from 1939, I think. But this is one of their jokes that they published in the pilot, where it gave, let's see, is Stanley Farr, likes baseball, dislikes farming, ambition of a successful businessman, and usually seen with a redhead. But this is Vasaki, Elgood Vasaki, one of the boys you just saw listed, and this is his brother. It was not unusual to have brothers come, and that's, I think that's James Farr, standing on the grand staircase. And they had many duties, many jobs. Here is the 1920s fire engine that they had on the property, kept across from the inn. And Henry's pondering, was this all worth it? And he kept showing up, as the boys spoke of. You'd be doing something innocuous until suddenly Henry Ford comes by, and he's standing right there, and he says hello to you, and you're wondering if you've done something wrong, but no, he just likes to know as he visited what was happening, and keeping an eye open for his investment. And then we had a big wind in 1938 that the boys also already spoke of, that blew down the Hager barn, which is behind the Hager house on Post Road, which would be opposite Wayside Glass today. And we want to thank Bill Andreas for his gift of the 1939 pilot, and Camino for the use of his collection. So thank you very, very much. And any questions? Yes, or answers, or
Yes. What brought Henry Ford to this area in the first place?
John Burroughs was a famous naturalist at the turn of the last century, and John Burroughs is in this book here, which is published a few years ago. Pardon? Can you turn up the volume, Mike? This is called There to Breathe the Beauty, and it's the travels with Henry Ford, Thomas Alva Edison, and this is John Burroughs on my left, and Harvey Firestone, and the sitting president of the United States would go on camping trips back starting in 1916, or even earlier. And it grew from a simple little affair to having a few people and maybe 3 station wagons to something that looks like something from Citizen Kane with 20 vehicles and their wives and their children and the silverware and the proper plates going out and seeing the countryside. But John Burroughs was always talking about philosophy, and Henry wanted to know where the philosophy came from, and he said, oh, from this man called Emerson. Where's Emerson from? Well, he came from Concord. So they came out here secretly in 1916 and looked at Concord, and when he got an offer in 1922, 23 to buy this old place called Howe's Tavern, he responded of all the people that were questioned whether they wanted to buy a piece. He said yes, and he bought it. So. Frank?
You mentioned that there was an airfield behind the Calvin Howe house. Was that an active airfield?
They hoped it to be an active airfield. Every so often, a boy would get it into his head with all this, with a tri-motor company that owned by Ford, that they could build an airplane, and they built it from scratch. And they had it, the airfield was essentially behind, what's your neighbor on the across the street there, diagonally? No, the other way, other side. Sishu. Behind there was the airfield, just a flattened area. So they would build an airplane, and then as maintenance people would tell my father, the airplane, when it was all ready to fly, would mysteriously disappear, because Mr. Young did not want them actually flying. He wanted them to get the experience of building it.
I can personally attest because I knew one of the boys from the Wayside Inn School, a Dr. Norman Lavers, who was our assistant minister of pastoral care. And we do every year a nativity scene thanks to Dr. Lavers because of what he did at the Wayside Inn. And when he walked me through my aunt and uncle's passing, he came one night and he told me the same stories that were told today. And he said, one of the reasons I'm a minister is because of the people and the boys and the teachers at the Wayside Inn School.
Thank you, Sandra. Sorry. What? Yes, Debbie.
I was wondering if there was anybody who lives in the 4 parts of the dormitory. That's 181 Dutton and the Red House Dutton, 199 and 208 Dutton. Or any of, which house did you live in?
We live in 181 Dutton, which is the house on the left-hand side running up Dutton with the 2 pillars in front.
Right.
And sorry.
Have you found any candy wrappers?
I actually found, we recently did a lot of renovations to the house, and I don't know if, I don't want to contradict you, Lee, but my understanding was that the central part of the 3-part structure is what is our house today with the 2 pillars. According... Yes, and that's because of the orientation of the windows. That's what we've concluded. In fact, I recently was communicating with the Ford Foundation in Dearborn, and I did receive 2 additional pictures that I don't think you folks have, and I've brought them with me to share with you. But we were doing a lot of renovations to the house in the last few years. The house was actually owned by Robert and Judy Sharon for, I want to say, maybe 35 years. And we did a lot of modernization, and one of the things we did was to insulate the attic. And when we were doing that, we found actually some curious things. We found some pin-up type things from the 1940s with markings strategically placed. We found some, I think, a porridge bowl and a spoon and some candy wrappers and a Donald Duck cartoon from, I think, the early 1940s or something. But we have those things and of course, would like to share them with the Historical Society.
Thank you. Any other? No. I was a kid when this developer, who I still don't know who it was, and he was the talk of the town, took this gigantic building and made it what it was. So it's only from my imagining what it could be. So we still have a lot of questions about that, because my father said they took the barn. Well, where is that in one of those houses? Don't know. So.
Okay, in the town crier this week, there was a picture of celebrating the virtual tour of Sudbury, which you can go to www.sudbury01776.org and go through the 7 sites. And there's a whole long discussion about the boys' school and how they cut it up and moved them around. We also have these books that Kurt Garfield and his wife wrote, Allison, and the story of the Wayside Inn as well. This is. Yeah.
So we have the 2 books available today, and hopefully we'll be selling them online. Any other questions or observations, or do you think this school could have existed today? That's the general opinion, that it couldn't. One, you need a lot of money. It cost Henry, over the 20 years that he was doing it, over $3 million, but that was also counting all the expenses on the 5,000 acres.
Do you know when the barn that was across the street from the Calvin Howe house, when it was built and when it was torn down?
I don't know when it was built, Frank, but I was told it was torn down by Henry because it didn't match his idea. Same as tearing down the original grist mill. So sometime in the 1923 period. I have seen pictures of it. I've seen pictures of the flagpole that used to be there and the whole thing, but I think that must be at the archives, Wayside. Yes.
Thanks, Lee. I actually did have one question. I've heard over the course of my time in Sudbury that at some point all of this property Henry Ford had considered, there was some connection with the United Nations or something like this. Do you know anything about that?
Yes. In January 16, 1946, a delegation of United Nations organization people came out here, well publicized. They took a tour by dirigible, which was impressive, of all the acreage that Henry owned at the time, which is by that time was only 2,995 acres. And they came down and they had lunch at the inn, gratis, the inn paid for it, and they declared to the public and thus the press that they definitely wanted this site. And they wanted it so that they could build what would become the United Nations, and they wanted an airfield, and they wanted 40 to 70 square miles of land to do this. Somebody corrected them, telling them that Henry only had 2,995 acres, which doesn't get anywhere near what they needed. So they went back to New York and settled on the Rockefeller offer. So, yes, you could have had back then in '46 there were cartoons showing the United Nations building being, as it is today, on the side of Sudbury River, in the swamp. Yes. Anyone else? Yes. No, wait. You are being recorded, sir. Mr. Keeney, before you die. Yes, I'm joking.
Thank you. Is the story of the United Nations that you just described in one of these books over here?
Yes.
Which one, do you know?
It is in, the story is in Kurt Garfield's The Last 100 Years, or 1990, let's see, 1889 to 1989, right. A short story.
I've been asked to find out, are there records about the men from the school who went into World War II and that served, like what percentage had served?
Right. Well, I just realized that they were in that slide presentation, but somebody, okay. The question is, how many boys served? Yes. I don't know of a boy that didn't serve is the way I can answer it. From looking at the records which were kept at the inn, which are now sealed, they all served. So, yes. Okay. Thank you very much, and we have refreshments. Oh, one more question. Yes.
The Forts Folly Dam across Boston Post Road, was that to supply water to the inn and the school, or was that for a completely different purpose?
Thank you. The Forts Folly Dam was started in 1927, and it was to provide water for drinking purposes, potable water, and for the fire hydrant system, which didn't exist. And that's one of the reasons the inn burnt in 1955, because there wasn't a fire hydrant anywhere near. But it was, as you know from the Chronicle bit I did recently, that it didn't work. It was set on sand, and the water just percolated out from the base. So again, thank you very much.